Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/ProRevenge, where in today's episode, a lazy Karen employee thinks she's invincible, treats everybody terribly, and OP absolutely destroys her. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories in this episode. Hit subscribe if you haven't, and as always, story submissions can be sent to this email right here. Okay, so last year, I took a summer job for a kids camp. The job seemed to be quite well paid, and I wanted to try how working with kids goes. The hiring process was a little odd. For the interview, I was called unexpectedly, and that woman, which was later my boss, spoke to me on the phone for about 2.5 hours, and she asked some really weird personal questions. For example, she asked, "You aren't a COVIDiot, are you?" Now, I do want to note that that will be a factor in the story. Anyway, I needed the money, and it was the only callback I had gotten so far, so I took it. She then made us all come in 2 times before starting the job so that she can explain it to us. Both times, it went on the whole day without being included in our payments because, quote, it was not mandatory. In the end, I got to be the boss of my team. The first day came around, and we faced about 20+ children with their parents. The boxes that we were expecting that had the list of names and the toys for the kids weren't there. We basically improvised and wrote their names as they came, and we hoped that they are indeed signed up. Later the boxes arrived, but the contents were measly at best. She had given us 2 kinds of games. It was like Uno and something else, which were bought like 3 times. We also got little instruments for the kids to decorate, but when she came around to check on us a few days later, she screamed at us. She told us that the effing kids shouldn't have been allowed to take the instruments home, which she never instructed, and it made no sense. So the next few days went on like this. She came around and screamed at us for doing something that made sense to every one of us, and pretending she had instructed us otherwise at the unpaid non-mandatory orientation meeting, which I want to note that I attend every single time, and she just talked about her personal life with no instructions. She then went on and offended every single person in existence. She doesn't want to have lactose intolerant or handicapped kids in camp because they're too much of a hassle. My Muslim colleague got scolded for wanting to go home to her toddler after a 10-hour shift, and the boss asked her in front of everybody if her son still needs to suck on her breasts all the time because otherwise, she doesn't have any reason to go home. Parents with questions or complaints are to be, quote, educated like kids because they behaved like that when they didn't get effed by their wife the night before. Also, she made us work more than 12 hours without a break, and then she gave me crap when I stood up and went home at exactly 12 hours worked. But 2 events stood out when she went after the kids. On the first occasion, you have to remember that this woman has an unhealthy obsession with Corona. She not only changed the rules of everything with us anytime it fit her narrative, she also did that with the parents, which led to misunderstandings every single day. So she asked the children ages 4 to 10 which one had done an antigen test and who had a PCR test. Now of course the children didn't know what that was, and a little 5-year-old girl raised her hand for the false one. When my boss noticed that, she gave this poor girl the scolding of her life, and she told her that she was dumb as a rock for not knowing the difference. Now I was so in shock. I probably should have slapped her for that, but I didn't. The girl tried so hard not to cry, and she didn't come back the days after. Now the second incident was even more disturbing. A 4-year-old boy hit his head at the playground when they were outside. I was in the back office when my colleagues came running. I then called the boss while my colleague called the ambulance. When I told her that and how my colleague was already on the phone with the ambulance, she scolded me. But not because that boy got hurt. No. It's because we called the ambulance. Now in her world, it wasn't even that bad, and the father was not allowed to find out, as if he was blind and wouldn't have seen the open wound anyway. The ambulance came and told us he was completely fine, and the boy suffered no further injury. He's fine now, thankfully. But I was furious. I was completely freaking out of anger. I had only worked there for 9 days, and the kids as well as us had been abused enough. Instead of going after my impulse to call her back and tell her off, I calmed myself, and the next day, I didn't go to work, but I went to the doctor. I explained that my boss abuses me, but I can't terminate the contract early. So to keep me from snapping, she put me on a sick leave without an end date. My boss wasn't amused when I sent her the doctor's note, but I ignored her calls. I then proceeded to talk with my teammates and encouraged them to get sick leave and told them exactly what they can do and say to get that. She even tried to get rid of my Muslim coworker illegally. I explained to her that the paperwork from them is not legal and she should ignore it, and also go on sick leave. So in about a 2-week time frame, my location had to replace all 6 people including me, who was the boss there. And I took records home too, so she couldn't pass them on. I also changed the password to my email account and did everything to piss her off. But the story doesn't end there. As I found out, the word spread like wildfire, and because she was such a piece of crap to everybody at every location, 1 month after the start, she lost more than half her staff. And some of them still had to be paid sick leave. Apparently, she called some of them and begged them to come back and offered bonuses as high as double the pay. And still, nobody came back to help. The silver lining was the parents also had enough, and many kids were taken out of that camp. So at the end of July, I was on sick leave and she calls. She proceeds to tell me, suspiciously calm, that if I don't want to come back next month, I should just tell her now. And she offered to end my contract without further obligations, and with my payment for the whole month of July. I tell her how I'm coming back because I really want to get better and other BS. And of course, I actually didn't. I proceeded to collect 1 additional full month of sick leave without even speaking to her directly again. I also went out of my way to continue offering information for every single staff member of her locations that wanted to leave and still get paid or wanted to know where they can report her. So in the end, this is what she got for being a disrespectful bitch. 1. She lost half or more of her workers. 2. Everybody hates her and wants nothing to do with her. 3. She had to pay me for the full 2 months. Also pay my vacation time out in money, which is quite expensive for them. Also pay my overtime and the mandatory bonus you get for doing extra hours. All this multiplied by 6 employees came out to around €6,000 for 9 days of work from them. Her entire enterprise went downhill. Of course, I also had to get my money through legal support, so that came onto her too. I can't explain how much detail I put into the legal planning to get all the people paid out as much as possible without any chance of legal repercussions ever. My ass is safer than safe. She won't be able to retaliate on what I did here. She did try to harass me though, and I blocked her. But I heard she read my personal information to other colleagues who stayed there and called me all possible names. So if she should ever even try to sue me or blackmail me, I have evidence and witnesses for trying to dox me, insult me, and various other things. Honestly, after I wrote that down now, I'm kind of proud, but also surprised at how nicely it all worked out. Guys, I have one question. How the heck did this crazy Karen even get this job? Like, she shouldn't be allowed to work with people, let alone children. It's crazy because her getting mad that an ambulance was called and that the parents shouldn't be made aware their kid was hurt makes me wonder how many times she's done this in the past. Like, I'm so glad OP found a way to get back at her, but honestly, she needed to get fired. So I used to work at a hospital data center in the network operations group. We physically sat in a room 24/7 next to the servers to make sure that things didn't catch on fire, we monitored for alerts, and did routine things like swap out tape backups, but it was pretty simple work. Now, this was a tech job, but there were people who had been there for many years back when you had to change out printer paper and run a command from an IBM mainframe. It was on really specialized hardware and software that was difficult to apply elsewhere, so it had become a dead-end job. And because there were people who weren't tech-savvy at all really, we weren't given much responsibility. Now, you can't tell some people that they can log into a server and others not, so we were reduced to the lowest common denominator. We were a network operations center where nobody was allowed to interact with any network equipment. So the lowest common denominator, you say. Meet my supervisor, Karen. Now, that wasn't her real name, but definitely her real spirit. Karen had been there for over 20 years, and she got the job solely based on seniority. She was also a sociopathic narcissist and one of the most unpleasant people that I've ever encountered. So shortly after I was hired, we were bought by another hospital and combined data centers. Karen was demoted to shift leads, and she had to work with us in the 24/7 rotation. She was very bad at her job, and our responsibilities diminished to very little. We also had no agency to fix any problems of our own, because it had to be a problem that Karen could solve. And Karen was both lazy and stupid. After a couple of years, I was promoted. On my first day after they announced the promotion, she said to my face, "You will fail." But she had a powerful tool at her disposal, the hospital bureaucracy. So since the place was unionized, the hospital had a just cause firing policy instead of an at-will policy, even for non-unionized employees. Now, this is, I think, generally a good thing. But on the edges, it set up ridiculous situations where it was impossible to lose your job, unless you were really egregious about it with repeated violations or you showed up drunk or high. We had someone steal computer equipment and they kept their job. It was nuts. And Karen had been there for nearly 30 years, so she wasn't getting fired without a lot of work. Karen was terrible at her job. One of the most important things about the job was monitoring for an alert, which would pop up. And then there was a procedure we had to go through in order for some data to go through. If we didn't do this, then a nurse wouldn't get their lab results back. So in one case, an alert comes in, and Karen sees it, and then decided to keep browsing the web. Now because of this, a patient from the cardiac ICU was going into surgery, and the doctors and nurses operating on the patient couldn't get a white blood cell count. The patient died. Now this still did not get Karen fired. She didn't even feel bad about it. She's just a complete soulless sociopath. Now I'm a real pro worker in general, but some jobs you absolutely have to do. I was so mad. She had to go, or she might cause other people to die in the future. I decided to keep a paper trail of everything she messed up on. It wasn't nitpicky, literal life and death stuff here. Verbal warning, first written warning, second written warning, final written warning, termination. A slog, and I'd rather spend my time doing anything else, but that's the way it went. Then she figured out she could work the system. As she approached work Armageddon, which was termination, she would tell HR that she was being harassed. Now the person harassing her was different every time, which would trigger a mandatory investigation. This investigation took about 6 months, and they wouldn't find anything, and we would carry on. Except for the warnings, they had a 6-month expiration, so she could always reset the clock when it got really close. Everyone was helpless, even the CIO couldn't do anything about it because of the bureaucracy. Karen was a menace, and the entire IT department had to interact with the data center staff, and that meant interacting with her, and she was universally disliked. And she had 20 years until retirement, and she would outlast the heat death of the universe. So then I had an idea. What if, under the guise of developing skills relevant to the 21st century, required everybody working in the Network Operations Center to pass the Net Plus exam? It's not a difficult exam, but it's not easy. I felt pretty sure that everybody on the team fell above the line of being able to pass except for Karen. We would give everybody better titles, a significant pay raise, and entrust it to do more with the equipment, which is something everyone desperately wanted. Then people could actually leave the hospital with transferable skills and do something else if they wanted and not feel trapped. So I spent 3 years in meetings with HR, with my director, with the CIO, with HR again, job description meetings that took 6 hours to tweak small wording. Hundreds of hours in meetings, absolute red tape hell. Now, do you have any idea what it takes to approve a significant raise in a bureaucracy muck factory like this? But the raises were crucial because it would absolutely not be fair to ask this of them. It would be like, pass this test or lose your job, without a large carrot attached. And that would lead to mutiny. And then it got approved. I also wrote the exam requirement into my own job description. It was important to be able to still do the job and not let my skills lapse because I was promoted. Also, this meant that I could cover for people when they were on vacation or sick. Plus, I also got that sweet pay bump. Now, it went over well. I was nervous, but the plan made sense, and I was able to communicate that. People would be more marketable, and the job would be more interesting, and most importantly, they would be making 20% more than what they were before. And I think it really helped that I also gave myself the same requirement when I absolutely could have chosen not to. The hospital would pay for off-site training. They would still get paid their full hourly wage during the training, including a shift differential for second and third shifts. We all paid for the materials. I scheduled 8 hours a week for people to go in someplace quiet to study. The job itself had a ton of downtime so people could study, but this was formally carved out time anyway. We paid for the exam, and if they failed, we would pay for a second attempt. We were given 8 months to pass the test, so this is how it was for the 8 months. Now, I didn't want Karen to have any excuse whatsoever and somehow convince HR that this process was rushed or unfair. Everybody passed on the first attempt except for Karen. Karen did not pass on her second or her third, which was a bonus attempt. So Karen, being the classic narcissist, thought this was somehow all about her. That this was a vast conspiracy engineered over multiple years and hundreds of hours just to get rid of her, and she would tell everybody within earshot what was going on. We're all thinking, yeah, okay there, Karen. You realize how insane that sounds, right? Not everything's about you. Well, okay, in this case it is, but still, only I and 2 other people know that. So I remember the exact time and date we told her. She was in such deep denial that it could ever happen. She thought she was bulletproof. Now, I don't think I'll ever achieve anything more satisfying in my career. I'm not one to usually take satisfaction in seeing someone's livelihood go, but she was uniquely awful. She was a patient danger, and it had been nearly a decade of working with her by this point, and I was just so sick and tired of her. I was a hero the day after she was fired. I went to the main office for a meeting, and people were congratulating me like I had just had a kid or won a marathon or something. Even the CIO. They were just so happy that they didn't have to supervise Karen anymore. But in my headcanon, they were congratulating me for pulling off this elaborate plan. Morale back at the data center was also high. We learned interesting things, and a couple of my coworkers left for better gigs elsewhere. And the ones who were content on staying were able to stay. We all had more money and job security. Her being gone was like a breath of fresh air. Newcomers were told stories of Karen, and they seemed exaggerated, but they weren't. In order to solve a very important and extremely difficult problem, I pulled off a vast workplace conspiracy that improved the lives of people I worked with, in addition to keeping our patients safe. Getting Karen fired is my greatest and most difficult accomplishment, and I can't even put that on a CV anywhere. Guys, this is an absolute beautiful revenge, and it really goes to show that if you put your mind to it, nothing is impossible. And seriously, I commend OP for dedicating 3 frickin' years to this. And guys, I know I say this a lot, but I only wish I could see Karen's face when she was told to pack her things and to get the heck out of there. Like, imagine thinking that you're so high up and invincible in the totem pole, only to find out in the end that your whole workplace got together and conspired against you, and you aren't. So I live in a consolidated county. That means the city and the county governments merged some years back to reduce administrative and infrastructure costs. This is important because services like fire, police, utilities, and trash pickup are now managed by former county officials, and not city officials. Many of these services are also much more inefficient, and some services have even been outsourced to private companies. So my municipality outsourced trash and yard waste pickup a few years ago, and the 2 companies who now do those collections are woefully inadequate, and their services cost more than when the city or county did it. They both have similar sets of rules of what can and can't be put out for collections. They also take fewer types of waste away, and they no longer come 2 days a week like the city once did. They now only come 1 day a week, and we're paying more money for less service. Now that the background's done, here's the story. So, I did some yard work over the course of a couple of weekends last summer. I was cutting some limbs, trimming some shrubs, and cutting down a dead tree in my backyard. Knowing what the rules are for how much yard waste, limbs, and leaves can be put out, I bagged everything that was supposed to be bagged, filling up 3 of them. Things like leaves, small clippings, weeds, and such. The paper bags for yard waste from the big box home improvement stores are what they require, so I used those. I just filled them up halfway to not make them too heavy for the waste collectors, even though there's no written weight restrictions. However, if a bag is too full, they will knock it over to spill out the contents so they don't have to pick it up. The pile put out for collection is not allowed to be wider than 10 feet, nor any deeper or higher than 5 feet, nor may it contain any piece longer than 4 feet. All important. All bags must be placed in a row, no more than 3 feet away from the limb pile. Now, my pile was maybe 4 inches longer than the 10 feet, only because of the tiny ends of the limbs hanging out of the pile. The pile was no longer than 3 feet and no deeper than 4 feet. In other words, it fell within the size limits, except for a few twigs with leaves. I also had the 3 bags, each about half full of clippings and leaves, all lined up exactly as required, and about 2 feet away from the main pile. They were scheduled to come on a Tuesday, but when I got home from work that afternoon, it was all still there. There was a pre-printed notice on my door that my pickup exceeded the prescribed size limits, and the note said that I would be required to either pay a $250 oversized load fee or reduce the pile size by half to make it fit into limit. So this is where the revenge comes in. I had the next 2 days off, so the next morning, bright and early, I got out the hedge trimmers. I trimmed the ends of the pile back to exactly 9 feet in length. After carefully laying those trim bits on top of the pile, I went to the backyard, where the limbs I had not trimmed up the week before were stacked for the following week's pile, and found 4 long, fairly straight limbs. I removed all the smaller limbs and leaves from those limbs, ending up with 4 moderately straight poles, each about 7 feet long. I then marked 1-foot intervals on each pole in fluorescent orange paint, and then stuck them in the ground. I basically stuck them in the ground to form a rectangle exactly 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. I then got out the surveyor's tape and tied it onto and around the stakes at the height of 5 feet. This established a visual outline of the volume I was required to stay within. I made absolutely sure that everything in the pile was completely inside the poles and below the 5 feet in height. This required adding almost 2/3 of the remaining pile in the backyard to the stack out front, to bring it up to the 4 feet 6 inches in width, 4 feet 6 inches in depth, and 9 feet 6 inches in length, and no pieces were longer than 46 inches. The pile was almost twice as much as the material before. This included some small logs, up to 4 inches in diameter and also 46 inches long. The limit is 5 inches diameter, all within the limits of 5 feet by 5 feet by 10 feet that the waste company mandates. I also carried each of the 3 bags of clippings into the backyard and filled them up as much as possible while still being able to fold over the tops and staple shut each bag. I also included small 8-inch to 10-inch sections of the ends of large limbs for added weight. The bags were now completely filled, and they weighed more than twice what they had before. I also had to use a hand truck to get them out to the curb as they were so heavy. Oh, and the extra clippings I generated, I filled up 2 more bags, and the total was now 5 bags, the company limit. I then went inside. I called the company and very nicely asked if they can come and pick up my yard waste since they had not done so on Tuesday. They agreed to send out a truck and crew and told me I would have to pay the fee. I told them, come on then. They soon arrived, and it happened to be the same crew that normally comes to my neighborhood. I then pulled out the 25-foot Stanley tape measure from my pocket and asked them to measure the poles to confirm that the space was within the required limits. They did so, and they agreed that the pile was not oversized, and they proceeded to spend the next 2 hours manually loading it into their truck. Oh, and it took both of them to manhandle each of those bags into the truck too. I told them very nicely and with a smile that I knew what 10 feet was. I pointed to the fence where it was marked with the orange electrical tape, and thanked them for coming out to pick up my yard waste. The 2 tired, sweaty waste disposal guys just groaned, got into their truck, and drove off. There was no extra fee added to my bill for that month. Never has been since. Now, I know they got paid for their time, and I know that I had to do a lot of extra work on my day off, but since last July, I have not once ever had them leave so much as a single leaf on the ground in front of my house. They actually had to do some hard work, with me sitting there in shorts, smiling, and drinking a cold Gatorade while they were sweating. Guys, I find this story freaking amazing. Like, everything OP originally did was up to standards, but I guess the collectors were picky and lazy, and it really came back to bite them. And hey, I hope they enjoyed the extra work that they tried to avoid in the first place. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /ProRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's wonderfully satisfying stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, I'll link it right here. OP's friend's family invites her on vacation and expects to use her as a servant. It's such a crazy story, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.